I mentioned in the group also in the morning when I put the message out that we'll have Devika Rangachari with us, and I've been reading her book since morning, The Queen of Ice. It's fascinating, absolutely. It takes you into a whole other world. So I'm really enjoying reading it. And a lot of people in the group also mentioned that you've also read it and you've enjoyed reading it. So I'm absolutely thrilled to have Devika. So first we'll do the formal introduction and then we can get to know who she really is. So this is the LinkedIn intro that I call it. So Devika Rangachari is an award-winning children's writer whose book Queen of Ice was on the White Raven list, won the Neev Young Adult Book Award, and was shortlisted for the Sahitya Academy's Bal Sahitya Puraskar. It has been optioned to be made into a movie and television series as well. Devika is also a historian who's conducted postdoctoral research on gender in early medieval Indian history. She's inordinately fond of reading, especially historical fiction, chocolates, potatoes, and exploring bookshops and libraries. She would happily spend her time amongst her four loves were it not for her lovely but stern editors who occasionally compel her to write. Her other book includes Queen of Fire, Parag Honour List of 2022, Queen of Earth, which is Parag Honour List 2021, shortlist for the Neev and JK AutHer Awards. The Train to Tanjore, 10 Indian Monarchs whose amazing stories you may not know, Tales of Love and Adventure, Swami Vivekananda, Man with a Vision, Harsha Vardhana, and Merry Mischief of Gopal Bhand, The Wit of Tenali Ram, and Growing Up on the IBBY Honour List. So that's the formal introduction. Devika, and thank you so much for making time. Devika, just so you all know, is not in India right now. She's in Doha, which has nothing to do with Kabir. It's just a place. But that's where she is right now. So Devika, welcome.
Thank you so much, Chetan, and hello everyone. It's wonderful to be here virtually with all of you, and looking forward to this session. So yes.
Great, great. Thanks. So, my first question is that, we know the formal things, so we know a lot about your achievements and all of that. But tell us about yourself as a person. The chocolates and the potatoes bit was very interesting. So,
Yeah.
chocolates to samajh mein aata hai. Potatoes is unusual. So, tell us about that.
Well, chocolates, actually, I moved on from chocolates. I'm now, I have grown up in that sense. I'm experimenting with other kinds of desserts. The aloo potato bit is, I think, because I'm a vegetarian and everywhere you go, it's always just paneer, and I'm sick of paneer. So I just feel that aloo is highly undervalued, you know? And yeah, and it's so versatile and so tasty. So that's me. And as for who I am, I would call myself more of a reader than a writer, actually. And as you said in the introduction, I usually have to be cajoled and pushed into, basically blackmailed into writing a lot of the time. Uh, so if it were up to me, I would just spend my time reading. For me, a library or a bookshop is my comfort zone, and that's pretty much me. I am happiest when I'm at home just reading and not having to interact with anyone.
And before the other folks joined, you were telling me that you taught for a while, but then you preferred research over teaching. So tell us
Yes.
a little bit about that journey.
I'm a historian as well, and so I've been writing for children as well as studying history practically all my life. And of course, it's basically if you do your PhD, it is expected that you go and teach. And of course, I did teach history for a while in Delhi University, but then I thought that I prefer the flexibility that independent research would give me. So I did my postdoctoral research on a fellowship, and then took on some other history fellowships, and then been writing a lot. And ever since my move to Doha, I think I've been focusing on my writing rather than doing research of any kind, just settling down. So in fact, I have moved from also being a children's writer into being a more to writing for grown-ups as well, as they say,
Oh,
because
okay. Right.
my first book for adults is a kind of narrative historical non-fiction, as in history for people who have no background in history and who are who would like to see history more as a story with the facts, of course, but accessible history. So I think this is my latest book, The Mauryas. So it's a
Okay,
it's kind of humorous look at the Mauryan dynasty and what it means and so on.
nice.
So
In the
that's what.
world of business, they have these courses which is not finance for non-finance managers. So
Yeah,
what you're describing sounds like history for non-historians. Is that right?
precisely.
Okay. All right.
That's what I.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Great. Yeah. And I saw that your other book, you also had this one about 12 lesser known kings. So there's a lot of non-fiction that you're also writing in addition to the fiction, right?
Yes, I. This is the one. 10 Indian monarchs whose amazing stories you may not know. Yeah,
Ah,
because when you study history, you realize that there are a lot of remarkable people who fall, into the cracks. And so there are only some people that you know of, and there are who feature in every narrative, and there are lots
yeah.
of equally interesting, remarkable people who are just not known. So
Right.
and so I focused on those for this book. This is for middle graders, just to let them
Right.
know that the whole idea is to make history interesting and accessible to to everyone, because it's a subject that a lot of people dread, and because of their nightmarish memories of school or struggling with some textbook or some teacher or the other.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just a way of saying that you know it's like a
Yeah,
story.
absolutely. I think the wrong association can put you off a subject completely. I mean, my
Absolutely.
daughter grows to grade 10 now, and half
Uh-huh.
of her association with the subject is about how good the teacher is. And if the teacher is no good, then they think the subject is bekar,
Subject is
which is
no
a
good, yeah.
terrible thing to do to a subject. It could be something
That
that she
is
would
true.
actually enjoy. I can see as a person she would enjoy, you know, let's say mass media, but teacher's bad, forget it. I'm not doing that. So yeah, terrible.
It's typical,
Anyway,
yeah.
yeah. So you said something very interesting, and I wanted to come back to that and spend a little more time. Last Sunday we had Shayoni, who was with us, and she talked a little bit about the age categories and middle grade reader and YA and all of that stuff. And you mentioned that the the 10 Monarchs book is a middle grade book. So when you write a book, do you start by thinking, okay, I'm going to write this for middle grade, or do you write the book and then you retrofit it to a particular category, or how does that work?
So I'm going to be totally undiplomatic here and say that I do not believe in slotting books and
Okay.
having them for particular grades, and then tailoring your writing to suit
Perfect.
particular age groups.
Right.
I said this one was middle grade because it is being sold as a middle grade book.
Okay.
It could as well be read by anyone. I mean, Queen of Ice is supposed to be a young adult book, but I have had a lot of
I'm enjoying it.
adults, like, yeah, and a lot of young, very young advanced readers also enjoying it. So I do not start a book with thinking about, oh my god, this is this particular age group, therefore I can only write in a particular way and on particular themes for that age group. I think it's more the publisher who says that, okay, fine, this is for, say, 8 to 10 year olds, or this is for 14 plus. So you broadly have in mind that maybe, the writing would slightly differ, in the sense that you might not experiment with a whole lot of so-called problematic themes for a very young age group. But having
Right.
said that, I when I was growing up, I read anything and everything that came my way, irrespective of how old I was. If I didn't understand it, I would leave the book aside, come back to it at a later age. And I still enormously enjoy children's fiction, picture books, and so on. So I don't think there is any need for this kind of I think this obsession that we have, that in bookshops and in libraries and everything will be slotted as per, no, you cannot go to this group because you belong to that age group, so you only read those
Sure.
books, this kind of thing.
Sure.
So yeah, I don't
Yeah,
allow
but
that fear to color my writing. No.
I can imagine that publishers do it purely out of they have to put things in a box and they have to market to that box, I would imagine. And there will always be people, those boxes can't be clean and
The
defined. There will be people who will always transgress those boxes big time.
the
So
point is
but
that I think, if I may be allowed to rant a bit,
Sure.
A lot of it stems from the gatekeepers, the
Mm.
so-called gatekeepers of the world of children's literature, who are basically a lot of the parents, a lot of the teachers, a lot of the librarians, a lot of the grown-ups basically interfering in what a child should read or shouldn't read, or how it should be marketed and what are the themes and so on and so forth, which is also totally unnecessary and unwarranted, and which basically interferes hugely with a child's reading journey. And I think that this whole nonsense of can a child handle a particular theme, or are our children equipped to deal with violence? I've been asked this question. Queen of Ice is has it deals with violence, and
Right.
therefore is a 14-year-old equipped to read it, which I find an absolutely ridiculous question, because you're exposed to a violent world every minute of every day. This is a reality of our lives, and you
Sure.
have otherwise no qualms in allowing a child access to social media or television, or well, even
Yeah.
the newspapers are telling you about violence, and then to worry insanely about a child who's going to read about this in a book. I think we totally underestimate the intelligence of children.
Yes,
They are
absolutely.
a very discerning, very intelligent audience. The fact that one, if a child reads, that means a child is automatically a discerning human being, and
Yeah.
will take from your book what they want to take. And so to worry endlessly and uh, sort of impose these restrictions and all that is I think just totally unnecessary. But
Yeah.
then, oh, well, we have to agree that economics drives the market. The gatekeepers have the money. The children are not going to go out and start buying books for themselves unless they have the means to do so.
Sure.
I guess
Hmm.
publishers have to cater to these. Okay, fine, we have to have these age groups. It just makes it easier for the parents or librarians or whatever. So I guess one has to be practical as well. Rants
Sure.
apart.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So before we started the session again, you were telling me about the workshops that you've been doing, and you mentioned that you also do a workshop on how to uh, get parents to encourage their children to read. So
Yes.
that I know that would be like 3 hours on its own, right? But
Yes.
tell us the
Three
gist.
days
Tell us
even.
in yeah. But tell us summary of what is your thesis on that? Why do you think kids are reading less, and what can parents do? I mean, is it just getting out of the way, or is there more to it?
Parents need to be in the way and out of the way, however odd that may sound. They need to be in the way in the beginning, because you have to teach a child to read, or you have to teach the child about the world of books before the child is even able to read or understand. You just familiarize the child with the touch, the feel, the smell of a book, and it has to be an activity that you do with your child. You lead by example. You make it
Right.
into when you read with a child who's learning to read, then you associate the whole activity with a lot of love, togetherness, importance, and so on and so forth. And then you have this discussion as a child grows, and what books do you want to read, what books should what books that I like to read as a child, and that kind of thing. I've seen a lot of parents who've insisted that their children read particular books that they read while growing up, because that's the only way to do it. And I think that no, we have to understand the times have changed, tastes have changed. And so ideally it should be some kind of two-way process. You read a book that the child wants you to read, and then the child reads something that you want her for him or her to read. So that's the way it works. You go forward, and then you get out of the way. You just
Yeah.
let the child pick up what they want to pick up and read. And I don't, s- a child is not going to become a bank robber because they read about a bank robber in a book.
Of course.
So just do not underestimate a child's intelligence. If you feel that something is terribly problematic, then by all means sit down with the child and have a discussion, or talk about your fears and talk about what you feel and so on and so forth. But by banning books, or by generally all this hysteria, then you're going to actively interfere with a child's enjoyment of books. And also to say your exams are coming, you're now in the 8th class, your boards are coming, stop reading, is the most ridiculous counterproductive thing that any parent could do, because reading
Mm.
confers so many benefits on a child that that will just basically continue and multiply all through the child's life. So um, I think, yeah, parents need to be instructed or rather guided in how not to be obstacles in their child's reading journey, and to just let their child discover the world of books for
Yeah,
themselves.
yeah. And I also think kids imitate us all the time. So if you tell your child, "Beta, kitab padho," and you are spending all your time on the phone,
You lead
your
by
child
example.
is going to look at you
Yeah.
and say, "Okay, but
Yes, yes,
the
absolutely.
phone
You
is
have
what."
to lead by example. Yeah. If you
Yeah,
associate the activity with a lot of enjoyment, a lot of, importance, then obviously your child is going to, take a cue from you.
yeah,
So,
yeah. Cool. Great. This is nice. So, so tell us a little bit more about Queen of Ice. That seems to be, the most kind of revered of all your work, or the most appreciated, most awarded, all of that stuff. And it's really a part of a series of three. So, was it always intended to be a series? Did you just write the first one and then it kind of took on a life of its own? How did that whole thing evolve?
well, Queen of Ice actually, I think, evolved in my mind long before I actually sat down to write it, because I used to do a lot of workshops, author workshops, reading workshops in school. And every time I mentioned the word history, which is what I studied, there would be this look of fear on the children's face and like, don't talk about this. This is the most boring subject, and so on and so forth. And then when I would just ask them a simple question about, do you think that women existed during the Indus Valley civilization, or how far back can you go? 99.9% of the time, the children would say no. It's an instinctive reaction. It's the way the textbooks are written.
Hmm.
Our What we teach is a male-centered history. You're basically teaching
Yeah.
his story. It's very little about the women of the past. And
Yeah.
then, I tell them, okay, stop and think about what you just said. And then there'd be the sheepish reaction. And then there would be, no, of course, women would have existed. And then the questions, why don't we hear about them? Why don't we read about them? You don't read about them because your textbooks usually focus on the men, the battles they fought, the kingdoms they won, the laws they made, the temples or the structures that they built. And then there'll be
Yeah.
one paragraph on the position of women where you'll be told what kind of clothes and jewelry they wore in the past, suggesting that right
Hmm.
from time
That is it.
immemorial, women were getting up and obsessing about what to wear. And I, as a historian, know that the reality is very different. There are actual sources of history in the form of texts, coins, inscriptions, and so on that tell you that women were a huge parts of the polity, society, economy, every context of the past, but they've just been written out of it. They've been made invisible because the way history is written is male centered. So you'll hear
Yeah.
about a few token women, and like the Rani of Jhansi, but then you will a lot of other women fall into the cracks. And Didda, the subject of Queen of Ice, was one such woman. She was part of my doctoral research, which was on integrating women into the past where they belong. They've been made invisible. Where are they? There is evidence for them, but they're nowhere to be seen. So this hidden in plain sight kind of thing. And Didda ruled Kashmir for around 50 years in the 10th century, and is either not written about, or if she's written about, is treated in a very stereotypical way, which is the way most women who are remarkable in history are dealt with, as
Hmm.
in, oh my God, she ruled, was she really a woman? Because a woman is supposed to be domestic and not having ambitions and gentle. And here is this highly ruthless, ambitious woman who knows she's very good at ruling and who has no qualms about saying so in a male centered context. and
Hmm.
and she was lame. She had a physical disability as well, but she overcame that and left a huge mark on the physical and mental landscape of Kashmir. And so I decided, why not write about her for young adults? That was technically my audience, but as I said, I don't really look at an audience. And so that they learn about somebody whom they're never going to read about in the normal course of things. So this is how Queen of Ice came about. I was very fortunate in having excellent publishers. I mean, Shiny, who you just spoke about.
Sure.
I was a little worried in the sense that I knew that the gatekeepers would all come like howling and saying things like, "Oh my God, this is not, this has violence and so on." And she said, "Just go ahead and write it, and it's our job to market it." And yeah, the rest, as they say, is history. So
Hmm.
done very
Nice.
well.
Great.
It's a lot of readers have. Young readers, they've appreciated it and they wanted to know why history can't be taught more in terms of these kind of stories that are missing from their textbooks and normal histories.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm really enjoying the book, and if all of you haven't read it yet, I would recommend strongly that you all should, read it. Uh, We are really fortunate that Penguin has, been kind enough to give us the PDF so you can read it from there. But I'm actually planning to buy the three box set now, if there is a box or all three in the series, because I really don't like free books. Basically, I think it's a disservice to the author, and I'm sure as authors, all of us will agree on that. So okay, I'm gonna ask one last question, and then we'll open it up to questions. I can actually see the gallery is already full of questions. So what actually happens is, Devika, is that the questions are taken on a first come first serve basis, and the last few questions often get left out. So I think people are panicking and putting their questions well in advance.
Okay.
But we try and take all of them, na guys. So all right, um, let me move to so my last question, and then we'll move on. Is so what's next on the plate? What are you planning now? Is there something you're working on now?
I'm working on the next in the Queen series.
Okay.
So that should hopefully be out next year. I'm also working on uh, converting my doctoral and postdoctoral research into accessible history again on women who've been left out and who have really remarkable, interesting stories behind them, but are just not known. So I'm hoping that is also going to be out next year. So these two things.
Lovely, lovely, awesome. All right, I'm going to start diving into the questions. Um, First question is from Arun. I was wondering what happens when you write. Uh, what happened? You write. You have to rephrase that question and post it again, Arun. I'm not sure what you mean. The next question is there a restriction on how long, as in number of pages, a middle grade book has to be? This is from Nandini.
Well, ideally, your publisher will tell you that if particularly if your book is part of a series. I don't know if you know about my book, The Train to Tanjore, is part of this series of Penguin, Duckbill, and Penguin
Yeah.
called Songs of Freedom. So they have a rough length, of say 25,000 words. But there's no hard and fast rule. You can of course exceed it, but rough, uh, you know, thumb of rule you are given.
Yeah.
But if it's something like Queen of Ice, there's technically no word limit. It has to be. I mean, it can't be less than say at least 30,000 words. So you can go on from there. It's yeah.
And Shayoni last time had said that, a lot of things got redefined when Harry Potter came along, because you have a seven-book series, and those book five and book six are like 700 page tomes. And yet they seem to have sold like all the others. So that's great. Next
Mm.
question from Arun is question: do all the books need research or only historical fiction? To what extent is research important for kid lit and for historical fiction?
Well, if you're writing anything to do with history, your research has to come first. I mean, you have to be absolutely accurate, and there are a lot of, you can't take it lightly. I mean, there are a lot of people who want to write historical fiction and who might sometimes get away with a very improperly researched fiction because the people at large don't really know the facts. I mean, unless you have a historian picking up your book and saying, hey, this is wrong or that is wrong. But I think it's my duty as someone with a background in history to actually be absolutely accurate about the facts, and which is the reason why I don't also invent too many characters in the books that I in my historical fiction, because I don't want some reader going away with the impression that a particular character existed when they didn't. So so that kind of thing. But otherwise, if you're not writing historical fiction, you're just writing a piece of fiction, but it's set in a particular place, in a particular context, then it is always wise to research that. You should know what you're writing about. You could even set it in, say, a school in a particular place, but you would need to know just even if you've completely imagined that place and it doesn't exist, but at least have some broad idea in your head about what that place is all about before you actually start writing.
Yeah, and I'll also give another example to that. Thanks for that. Was that this guy Nikhil? We had him on FDC itself, I think, about a year back. Nikhil Gulati wrote this book called The People
In
of the
this one.
Indus.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And he's not a historian, and he's very upfront about the fact that, look, I'm not a historian, but he wrote the story and he did all the art, and then he got in touch with a historian, guy who was a specialist on Indus Valley called Jonathan Mark Kenoya.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then he got Jonathan to fact check everything and make sure that things were all right. and he made a lot of changes and he made a lot of edits to the book, and now he mentioned him as a co-author. But I think it was a smart thing for him to do, because if you don't want to do all the research yourself, bring someone in who can validate all the facts and make sure that it's
Yes,
kosher. So yeah,
absolutely.
that's another way
Absolutely.
you can do this. Yeah. uh, and Nikhil had also done a course at the Himalayan writing retreat. He had attended a course with Mariam, actually, I was mentioning to you. So he had
Uh-huh.
actually
Yes, sir.
attended a
Uh-huh.
course with Mariam. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Next question is from Kubi Gangdev. How do you manage to write for a young adults in a way that treats them like adults, but in an age appropriate language? I don't know if you think that hard, but
No. The thing is, as I said, I also sometimes write the kind of books that I would have liked to read at a particular age. And also, and this has been said often enough, when you write for children, you do not write down to them, because, as I said, they are extremely discerning, intelligent, discriminating, and you just need to talk to them the way you talk, to everybody around you. And they will pick up, what they want to from what you write. If they don't like it, they will not engage with it. So this kind of patronizing tone, or trying to teach them, or moralistic, this will never work. So you just, it's like having a chat with them, and you treat them with respect, as people who you want to address, as equals, and it works.
right. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, I liked one of the things I really liked in your book was that the language is very simple. And you're not trying to impress anybody with the language. What's impressive is the story, the plot, the characters. But the language is just the purpose of the language is to convey the facts. And I think that automatically makes it accessible to even, people who are not graduates. You don't have to be. All right, cool. The next couple of questions are just observations. My parents didn't stop me from reading anything, so it's fostered my love for reading. Mostly reading for pleasure is not encouraged. Next is from Nandini. Who decides if a book becomes a series, the publisher or an author?
Well, it could be both ways. You could have an idea for a series, and then you approach your publisher saying, "This is what I feel," and it could go into 3 books, 5 books, whatever it is. And if they're okay with your idea, then you could start it off right away. Sometimes the publisher sees potential in something that you've written. They see potential for a series, and ideally, I mean, the market, it's basically series that works better, because then you get the reader hooked onto one kind, and then just for familiarity and interest, they'll go on and on buying the same kind. So
Yeah.
yeah, because when I wrote Queen of Ice, I had no clue that it was going to be any kind of series, but it just, the other two just organically fitted into that, and we thought that, okay, they all deal with prominent women, so why not have the same similar sounding title, so it becomes a series. So it could
Okay.
work out.
And this I've heard from lots of people, especially for kids writers, is that the publishers prefer series
Yeah.
because it just makes it easier and more predictable, and selling it is also easier. And kids also
Yes.
like, we've all read Famous Five and Secret Seven and Three
Yes. Yes. Of
Investing.
course. Yeah.
So somehow, especially at that age, and I think even much older, James Bond, but even at that, and Sherlock Holmes, but even at that age, I think series seem to really work. Next question is sort of a repetition. If one doesn't have a background in history but wants to write a historical fiction novel, where should the research start?
You decide which period, which place, which character you're going to base your story on, and then you read up anything and everything you can get your hands on that particular subject. You can't wing it, because even if 9 people will swallow what you say, the 10th one will sit up and say this is nonsense. So you have to actually do that basic, research, respect what you're going to put on paper. And also, this one thing I would tell people who want to write anything to do with history, and this is nothing to do with facts, it is that there's this mistake often made that because you're writing about people who are so far removed from you in terms of time, that they were not human beings. We have to remember that you're dealing with people who had the same kind of fears, joys, concerns, worries, struggles as you, maybe in different forms, but they also were human beings with all their foibles and everything. And a lot of people feel that the distance in time suddenly makes them into some kind of strange robotic creatures who weren't anything like us. you know.
Mm.
And that creates a sort of this artificiality in the writing, it's kind of contrived style. But once you realize that they're just like any of us, a child, you know, removed from us in time, like by 5,000 years, would also want to play, would feel hungry, want to eat, want to cry, want to be happy, want to go on adventures. That is what we need to remember.
Yeah. Yeah, I was reminded by about Anand Neelkantan. So of course he
Hmm.
doesn't write history; he writes mythology. But even in
Mythology,
that, the
yeah.
level of but the amount of research that he had to do, and the number of versions of the same text that he read before he wrote something like Vanar
Mm.
was pretty astounding. So, and as readers, as writers, you have to be a reader, and I think if you're a reader and you read voraciously, research can't be that hard. I mean, I would imagine you have to be discerning, and it's a little more advanced as a skill. But if you read, then it's that much easier, I would imagine. I'd like to think.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Next question was, how do you engage a reader no matter the genre? How do you persuade the reader to read the next book in a series or even the next page? That's a question from Shreyank.
You should have something you want to say. It should be a solid plot. Now, a lot of people mistake um, an idea for an actual story. I mean, let's just take the Harry Potter example because you mentioned it. If I approach a publisher with, okay, I want to write a story about this boy in a boarding school who's an orphan and who has this nemesis who's trying to kill him or whatever, that is your idea. That's your flashbulb moment. Uh, but that is not what is going to sustain you over 7 books. How do you get from your idea to your plot, is what the whole process of writing is about, to engage your reader's attention. And then you set it in this boarding school which comes alive. You have his different friends, you have his different enemies, you have his teachers, you have his everyday worries, is this thing, and then the overall story of what is happening there. That is your plot. How do you flesh out your plot is what the writing technique is all about. How do you get from point A to point B to then have 7 books, which each of which engage the writers with a lot of, and there's no real repetition. So you have to think about that. I mean, very deeply about that. That is what keeps your readers engaged.
Mm.
It's not enough for me to say I want to write about this queen who ruled Kashmir. And so what? I mean, there are 1,000 people who ruled at different points of time. What is it in your story that sets it apart? So then you get into what is the voice you're using. I mean, are you writing it in third person? Are you writing it in first person? What works for you? Do you want contrasting voices in the same story? Do you want one person telling you the entire story? Do you want to start at the beginning, or do you want to actually start at the end and work your way backwards? What are the elements of interest, climax, adventure, suspense that you are going to throw in? How are you going to make this character progress from the first page to the last? Is there some kind of growth trajectory that you want her to follow? So these are all the things that go into making your readers stick with you from the beginning to the end.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up voice because that's something I noticed. And for a lot of the folks who've been in the workshop, when I talk about voice, I usually give the example of Wonder because I talk about how in Wonder they've used multiple first. So even in Queen of Ice, Devika has very successfully used multiple first because the book is told in the voice of Didda, who's the queen, and then it's told in the voice of Valga, who is her maidservant. And it's a very interesting thing that the moment you do that, the whole story kind of flips on its heads every once in a while, and you get this whole other perspective. One, you're looking at things from this very elevated top down sort of thing, and then the other time you're looking from the perspective of the servant girl and her life and how she sees the queen as this almost like this goddess and friend. So yeah, that's a very interesting one, and I'm glad you mentioned that. So yeah, please do check out the book, and in that's one thing to observe is how multiple first as a voice. Do you bring in a third one later? I'm only halfway through it. Or is it just
No,
these two?
no, it's just these
Okay.
two because they're very different personalities. I also wanted that
Yeah.
to come out,
Yeah. Although I
in
thought that the third guy, I'm forgetting his name now, the horse, the boy who loves the horses, he also, his
Naravan.
voice, yes,
Yeah.
Maravahan. His voice also might have worked if you have wanted to bring that in, but maybe it won't serve a purpose to the plot, like you said.
Yeah,
So
it is.
yeah,
Yeah, because you also don't want your reader's attention being spread too thin. Okay, there's
yeah,
this one, now there's that one, now there's this one, now who else? So if you keep, you basically have to grab the reader by the throat and force them to. I mean, this is a very violent kind
stay with
of
the book. No, no,
description, but
absolutely.
it's more or less that. It's a metaphorically, you have to grab their attention and force them to stay with you. And
Right.
there are all these different ways in which you do that.
I have a quick question, then I want to move to the next one. So you now, you're telling us that the book is actually based on the life of a real person, but as a genre, is it classified as fiction or non-fiction? This story,
It is historical fiction. Fiction because there are only, the further back in time you go, the less your sources are. So there are
right?
only certain number of sources pertaining to Didda which you've used, but then there are lots of gaps in our understanding, in our knowledge, and you fill that in by what I would call plausible fiction. I mean, I cannot
Sure.
invent wildly. It is a certain context. It is a certain period. I have to be true to the facts and the period she lived in. So,
Right.
but things like, even when you're writing anything to do with history, when you bring in things like dialogue, when you bring in things like, movement, you
Sure.
don't know that that actually happened unless it's profusely documented. And it might
Right.
not be for the period you're
Okay.
talking about. So that is where your fiction comes in, as opposed to
So
something like non-fiction, which is basically just straight, like this, straight
right.
narratives about, people existed. I'm not embroidering anything, but here I
Yeah.
have to bring in the human element. I don't know if Didda actually woke up a particular morning and decided, okay, today I will do this.
Yeah.
Um,
Of course.
but by using non-fiction, I'm doing that.
So
But I have
that
to.
that is that's sort of like the question answer to the next question, which is, I've read Rakesh calls The Last Queen of Kashmir more serious in some fictional elements. How do you determine the amount of humor and creative license? So Sunil, I'm guessing that was, so Devika sort of just answered that. But if you want to add something, Devika, by all means.
Humor, I do not really include in historical fiction too much because there's. I included in tales like like the train to Tanjore. There's a lot of humor and all that, but that's also history. But I feel that my Queen series is like, it's very serious subjects, but my putting humor in it might just dilute things a bit. Creative license has to be kept. There has to be a very fine balance when you're using creative license in works of historical fiction, because unlike other stories that come completely out of your imagination, where you can have 100% creative license, you do whatever you like, you invent anything you like, you create history immediately gives you a certain structure and restrictions that you have to work within. So there is only that much that you can make your characters do when you know that that they have to move in a particular way. There are these certain facts, you know um, that deal with their life, and so you have to move in that direction. So it comes with practice. You have to maybe reread what you write to make sure that it doesn't, that it's commensurate with your facts, that it doesn't read as something you very contrive, that you suddenly put this in and no, this is not how a particular character of that time will be talking or acting or behaving, or dressing up like, or eating or whatever. So you yourself will know your own limits as you start to write history, and you get more used to the whole thing. Yeah. um,
The next question was, what inspired you to write for children?
Well, I never really set out to write, saying that I'm going to write for children or I'm going to write. As you mentioned, when you're a reader, you're automatically halfway there. So I just read, and read. I still do. And it is just, sometime when I was in college that I answered. It was basically an advertisement for a competition for children's writers organized by the Children's Book Trust many, many years ago. And I just responded to that, wrote this book about something that happened to me in school, and it won a prize. And I remember the feeling of, yeah, I mean, pleasant shock, I would say, that it came back to me in the form of a book with my name on the cover, and I realized, oh, I've written a book. And then I entered that competition a few more times, and then and I won more prizes. And then, the world of writing for children in India in English is very small. So, if you write for one publisher, you others get to know you, so you basically end up writing for the same set of people. Everybody does, so they contact you, and that's how it just goes on. So never really something that I thought I would actually consciously do. Of course, I was very inspired by the books that I read, by the authors that I read when I was growing up, so maybe subconsciously I wanted to emulate them, but not really is this something that happened along the way as a
Nice.
consequence of my love for reading.
Yep, it all starts there. Next question. Your background and with your background and qualification, how easy or difficult is it for you to write historical fiction for young readers?
It is easy and difficult. Easy because I have all these facts at my disposal, and I just have to choose what will make them read and not run away from a book saying, "Oh my God, I don't want to read Queen of Ice. This is another history book." So I have to somehow tempt them into reading it, staying with it, and realizing that history can be very interesting. Depends on how it's portrayed. It is also it's difficult because again, I have 1 million facts, and how do I navigate through those facts to get to the
Sure.
most pertinent ones and make it readable and accessible as well. So it's both easy and it's difficult. So the
Yeah, I
background could
can
be both
imagine.
an
Yeah,
advantage and a disadvantage.
I can imagine, and the fact that you have a PhD and you've done postdoc work, and yet you're able to write at a very simple level. I think that's rare, by the way, because I think most people who are experts, they will live and breathe the jargon, and they will not be able to let go of the detail because simplification somehow makes things inaccurate. But that's a trade-off that I think somewhere you have to strike if you know a lot about a subject.
Yeah.
It's like, when you're in grade 7, your chemistry teacher tells you that atom is the smallest unit of mass. And then you go and then they tell you, अच्छा नहीं उसमें proton electron भी होते हैं. I'm like, वो झूठ तो नहीं है. लेकिन, so then you say, अच्छा पिछले साल झूठ बोल रहे थे. So it's like, where do you draw the line? Right? So,
It's true. And I also think that if you write for a particular age group, if you write for young adults, you write for children, I think you have to be in your head part of that group. I mean, somewhere in
yeah,
my head, I'm still frozen as a child. I have very vivid memories of school and what I did there, and the way I interact. I enjoy interacting with children and so on. So you have to keep that part of you alive. You
right.
cannot think like a 100-year-old serious grave person and then presume to write for a 15-year-old.
Then you
You
will
have to know
write
their
down.
world. You have to know their world. You have to be a
Yeah.
part of it. You have to understand it. You have to appreciate it somewhere at the back of your mind when you're writing for them.
Right. Great. Yeah. Okay. Sonia has a question. The industry rules say that a 7-year-old MC, I mean, main character, I would assume, works for readers younger than 7. What if the story and the length of the book are not suitable for younger than 7 readers, but it won't work to make the main character older? How can I navigate this situation? So this is following on from what was discussed last time, where they said that the rule of thumb is that if you're writing for a 5-year-old, then make your character a little older than that person. If you're writing for a 12-year-old, then make your character a teenager. So how can I navigate this situation? It's a little binding on creativity when you have to tick so many boxes. Do you have
No,
any suggestions or
I
advice?
feel yes, theoretically it works that way. If you're writing for a 10-year-old, then ideally the protagonist should be 11-year-old, somebody slightly older, because the feeling is that a 10-year-old will not want to read about a kid younger than me. How am I interested in that kind of thing? But it doesn't always work, because if you have a really great riveting story to tell, um, well, the entire world was reading Harry Potter. Harry starts off as a whatever 11-year-old, and you have 20-year-olds, and 50-year-olds reading about him. So it all depends on how compelling the character is, how compelling your story is. If you
Yeah.
have too many restrictions and fears in your mind when you sit down to write, you will not write, because creativity is all about pushing the boundaries, seeing where you can go with what you have. Try it. I would say there's nothing right or wrong when you write.
Yeah.
If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. If it works, it works. Nobody's yet been able to point to that one magic formula that this will work every time. Sometimes it can, sometimes it won't. So just I think leave all this behind and just see. Yes, keep broadly. Yeah, don't write about a 2-year-old, for instance, if you're aiming for to attract a 10-year-old. Of course, don't keep the difference too stark, but at the same time, see, is your voice strong enough to overcome these kind of theoretical barriers, and then you see how you go with it.
Yeah, and I also think that in this world, I mean, this is art that we're dealing with, so there are very few rules. What you get from
Yes,
most of these
yes,
sessions is guidelines, right?
yeah,
And those
it's a
guidelines are always
theory.
flexible. Yeah.
Yeah,
So you look
yeah,
at the boy in striped pajamas. You look at
yeah,
Little Prince. I mean, Little Prince is a fabulous book for any age, but so it's fine. It's
yeah, it's
very
fine,
workable.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Uh, Vidya, I'm not sure I know what your question means, but I'll read it out nonetheless. Maybe Devika, you'll get it. When you're writing historical fiction, how do you track the timeline between two events spanning across a large timeline?
Um, I don't usually spread my story over two timelines or parallel. I keep it all in very specific in one, say, a span of say 20 years, even a few months, or the lifetime of one individual. So I don't, that it requires a lot of technique and a lot of thought if you're going to do these kind of parallel times. There are some wonderful books that have worked that way, but I feel more comfortable doing it this way. So I'm probably not the right person to ask about this. You could, in fact, read Shabnam Minwala's Zen. I don't know if you. It's published by Dugville recently, where she has parallel timelines and she interweaves the two, and it's historical fiction and it's relates to the present, so you could read that. There's also this wonderful book called Charlotte Sometimes, I think written by Penelope Farmer. If it's a classic, it's a very old book, but again, two timelines that intersect. So if you want to do it, it's very ambitious, but you should have like a master plan ready where you plot everything. This is happening there and this is happening there, and then try and see you don't get the facts mixed up, or the storylines mixed up. Requires a lot of finesse and technique. But
What
if you have a
Minwala
great
did you
story
say?
to tell, why not?
What was the name? What Minwala? Zen?
Shabnam
Shabna.
Minwala. Her book is called Zen. Um,
And Charlotte
it's just,
sometimes was who?
I think it's Penelope Farmer, if I'm not mistaken. It's a classic. It's an old Penguin classic. I read it as a kid, and I read it again recently, and she's done a marvelous job
I'll check those out. All
of
right,
these two
great.
timelines that intersect.
Um, Yukta has a question. How can we write horror and ghost stories for children?
So, Yukta, there are only two genres that I neither read nor write. Science fiction, because I was hopeless in science as a kid, and I've never got over that fear of physics, maths, chemistry, bio that I had as a kid. So I do not read science fiction. Just I believe it's very interesting, but I neither write nor read it. Horror and ghost stories, again, something I do not read because I have an overactive imagination. I tend to brood about things that I've read, and I do not want to stay awake at night, frightening myself about something that I've read. So, wrong person to ask. Sorry.
All right, great. And before the last question, I'm just going to encourage everyone, if you haven't updated the tracker, please do that now because we'll open up the tracker next. The last question was it's not a question, it's an observation from Sonia saying that's an encouraging answer. So, yeah, cool. So we'll move to the tracker now. Do we have any last questions? Otherwise, we can let Devika go and then we can discuss the tracker. So, Devika, thanks so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. I will be in touch with you. How often are you in Delhi?
Oh, every 2 months I land up there. Family is there. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
All right. Perfect. Great. So we should hook up and then maybe we should also explore you doing a workshop for us. Suddenly,
sure,
we
would
seem to
love
be doing lots
to.
and lots of history because we've got Akash Singh Rathore coming. We've got Manu Pillai, who's promised to come in July or August. So I think you'll fit right in. So it'll be perfect.
Sure,
Great.
would love
Thank you. Thank you
to.
for
Thank
an
you so
absolute
much.
wonderful session.
Thank you so much for this session, and thank you, everyone. Really enjoyed answering your questions, and yeah, and all the best for you in your writing journeys. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Devika.